Welcome back to the Daily Edge. Today it's going to be a fun day. Glad to be back. Todd just got back from a trip. Good to see him. He went overseas. Today's going to be interesting. There's been a lot of dialogue around these data centers that are popping up. So today will be a little bit of AI. We'll talk about some of the data center stuff. I think there's a lot of dialogue going on and kind of where we're going in the future. So I've done quite a bit of research here. I live in Marion, Indiana, smaller community, and there's the possibility of a data center being built here. I've heard there's lots of discussion on social media. Luckily, I have stayed off social media for the most part, but I have caught wind of some of the concerns, so I started to do a little bit of research there. But before I jump in, have you guys done any research or have you gotten any conversations around the building of all these massive data centers and kind of what's the vibe that you guys are hearing?
Yeah, I mean, there's been different tiers, right? I think when data centers were first popping up, especially in the California area, that was when we were hearing, and this is years and years and years ago, right? The first wave of brownouts and electricity shortages. And that was kind of it seemed to be the first inflection point. You know, these data centers are just absolutely crazy power hungry. And then what I've seen over time as things have evolved, and again, we'll go back to you and get your insight on this, because are things like the noise pollution. You see some smaller communities, typically in the Southwest, that, you know, all of a sudden one day they hear this humming noise. And I've seen videos, I don't know if it was Vice or somebody who did a documentary on one of these towns that, you know, there were instances where in the home it was like over 90 decibels in a consistent, buzzing or humming for days on end, or maybe it was just at a particular time of the day and it was causing mental health issues. Obviously, if you have a really loud noise. And then the other things that have kind of popped up for me lately that I've seen are around pollution, whether that is, I believe I read or saw somewhere that one of the Tesla data centers is using some type of power solution that emits methane or something like that. As well as, the perception that there are other pollutions or pollutants in the air that are, particularly carcinogens or things of that nature. So I've seen a number of different things like that. And it seems that the solutions to these problems, at least the original the problem of power and or water, is to build these data centers in more rural communities that aren't already, where the grids aren't already taxed like they would be in, Central California or something like that.
That's a great point. I mean, so let's talk about, I know the big thing around here, there's a lot of worry about water. And so in our town, I don't believe it's as big of an issue. So one thing is water supply, right? Water supply, there's power supply, and then there's the potential water contamination, I've heard. So understanding that, and I've done some research with AI to try to understand that better. But I know for our local community, Marion was built with, I think it's a 12 million gallon capacity, give or take a little bit, because we had a lot of factories back in the day. We had Ball Memorial, where it was a glass factory, used tons of water. We had RCA, where they made television, tons of water. So we have this capacity of like 12 million gallons, something around there. And we are operating less than 5. So we have a data center of the magnitude they're talking about would run 3.3 million gallons a day, which is a lot. We have the infrastructure set up. We have, so some communities, I believe, and again, I don't think this is all data centers are good or all data centers are bad, right? It depends on the situation. It's so water constraint, I don't believe for us locally is a constraint. But then it goes, well, our price is going to go up then, right? Well, if the infrastructure is there and now you're adding in a new revenue source, because now you have this user that's using 3 million gallons a day, that's going to be an asset, or they're going to be able to receive revenue on an existing system, which could arguably help keep prices level. but in some cases to where they're building a data center where they're maybe creating a shortage for the community, or they're having to build infrastructure, I could see where that could actually be a real concern. On the data, or on the power side, is even more interesting because I don't know how power works and when blackouts start to happen. And do you guys have a good sense of like, I mean, you mentioned the blackouts or the brownouts in California, or people had to monitor, like, how do we, I feel like the power grid is somewhat all connected. Do you guys have any sense on how the power grid works, or how the, because these obviously are going to use a ton of power, and how that maybe impacts the local community or the pricing?
I don't. I do, I do know that alternative power solutions are always looked towards, or a lot of times looked towards in these particular situations. Like I mentioned earlier with Tesla using, I feel like the number's 37 units that are stationed outside of this massive data center that are powering it, using, again, a different type of power technology. But I don't understand necessarily, and again, maybe you guys can research this while one of the other of us is talking, kind of what that looks like. I think, interestingly enough, maybe we come back to the electrical situation. I think the other picture here, and we talked a little bit about this, is, the majority of the data centers that exist today, and still a lot of the ones being built, aren't necessarily AI. They're not these massive data centers filled with, systems that are running on these GPUs for training AI models or any of those types of computations. It is crazy, if you think about the fact that this technology is really only come into purview for us over the last couple of years as a society, that it's already up to 25% of the new data centers. That's a pretty substantial number, but it's still not the majority. I think maybe the bigger picture is, are we being responsible from a societal perspective as it relates to how optimally we're using what we have out there, right? It seems like, I think we've all listened to some information lately around, like, it seems like as a society, or as leaders in technology, these AI companies are kind of trying to brute force things, just throw more and more and more and more and more compute, when maybe that necessarily isn't the right approach. Maybe that's a good way to pivot this. Is there's going to be need as we move forward from a technological advancement perspective to have things like this, and there are absolute benefits there. All of this data center spin up obviously started with the internet, and then as cloud storage became more of a thing, and then streaming became more of a thing, and then social media, and now AI. So I think that's another piece of the puzzle: is, are we being responsible with it, and do we recognize collectively that, while, isn't it funny, isn't it ironic that people are complaining on social media, but the data centers that are being built are for Meta, right? Like, you're sitting there utilizing something that needs, a massive amount of compute to run globally. You're kind of creating your own problem.
I think that's what's interesting about this whole topic for me, and this could be AI specific, but more broadly, is people understanding the implications of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So I think for me, one of the boys said something to me the other day about using ChatGPT and the fact that it consumes so much power and is not great for the environment, right? You could probably say I recklessly use Claude and ChatGPT and AI, probably because I don't have direct visibility into how it's impacting, how it impacts, and obviously my individual consumption, but at scale, I think that's a challenge in general, is how do we connect each of our behaviors on a day-to-day basis with the background implications as a society. And I think that's the challenge here, is you don't really know it until you live in a community where a data center is going to potentially go up, and you understand the implications of the increased stress, whether it be on the power grid or on the utilities grid, and or the noise or whatever that happens to be. I mean, it was the same thing with the windmills right out on the farms. Your in-laws have do have a large farm in the Tipton area, and when they wanted to come out and put windmills out there, there's implications of that, right? And so I think for me, that's the interesting thing. And how do we do better at helping people have visibility and transparency into how what they're doing? You have a lot of people, this is even in the food system. Like, you have kind of, I don't think anybody feels good about animals being slaughtered, right? In slaughterhouses and things, but we're all eating meat like all the time. And so it's, I don't know, to me, systematically, that's what piques my interest on it.
Well, I think it's weird. I think there's this crazy juxtaposition in a sense that as things evolve from a technological perspective and we're bombarded with more and more and more information, we have to become better as humans at filtering. So we're constantly filtering out more and more and more and more because we're getting overwhelmed with data. So it's like we need to expose people more, but we're also actively pushing away. Like, I don't need any more. Like, I get it. I think that's kind of a weird situation that we're in from a humanistic perspective. Whereas just you look historically, we were naturally obfuscated from other things, right? Like we talk a lot about exposure to just global news and how fast things hit us. And in the past, when you were exposed to something to help you recognize where you fit into this bigger picture, it made much more of an impact because you didn't get a chance to see a lot of these things in real time. Now we see so much of it in real time, you're just naturally ignoring the majority of it. So it's like this weird push and pull. But it's a problem as old as time. I mean, how many times you look back, call it a decade ago, 8 years or so, when the absolute top of everybody's mind from a priority perspective was green. Right, we're going to kill the world. It's all over, and then you would see the celebrity who's taking the private jet from city to city, talking about how bad the environment is and how we need to fix things. And it's the same. It's like it's so nuts, and a lot of it's this ideological signaling. We're big F1 fans in my family over the last couple of years, and F1 has. And Apple does this too in my day job, right? Oh yeah, we're not putting chargers in the boxes because we want to save my ass. You don't want to spend money on the chargers and you want to make more margin. You're not trying to save the planet. Same thing with F1. Oh, so let me get this straight. You have jets flying F1 cars all over the world, but changing 22 cars to have more electrical power than gas power, saving the planet. Like, get out of my face. So, I think that's one of these problems. Like, it goes, yeah.
So how? I mean, this is exactly kind of where I wanted this to go. Is the habits that we have and the lifestyle we live. We're not willing to sacrifice in a lot of instances some of those things, but yet we're so passionate about some of these. Well, I don't want a data center in my community, but I'm not giving up Facebook. I don't. Why is there 7 coffee shops on the bypass, but I'm buying my $7 coffee every single morning, right? So it's like the behaviors that we have. So like if we don't want data centers being built, pretty simple. If everyone got off their phones, stopped using social media, reduced the amount of technology usage, they wouldn't be building these data centers at the pace. They'd still probably build some, but it was like I was trying to figure out like what's the per hour cost that like what does Facebook get for every hour you spend? And I thought it was going to be something astronomical. It turns out it's like 13 cents. But for like every hour that you're scrolling, they're making 13 cents on average. Now for higher profile people that they can advertise higher things to, it's more, and some it's less, but every hour you're saying build the data center. Every hour that you're scrolling, you're saying build the data center and build the coffee shop and, and it's like, are we ever going to feel passionate enough about something to give it up?
You know what I think is interesting about this, and this goes back to the visibility, is the business models have shifted, right? You used to pay for things, right? And now people aren't paying for things. companies are because they're advertising to those people. So what's really interesting about that is it creates an interesting incentive, right? Because now people can consume for free and someone else is paying for the party, right? But
You're paying with your attention.
yeah, correct. Yeah, which is, in my opinion, more expensive, but it's not something that people feel as directly. And so I think there's this whole transparency piece of people just understanding the ROI of their habits and how it's impacting themselves or the broader society as a whole. And then there's this other element of actually incurring the cost physically. And I think I think historically that was more of the model. As you consume, you pay. If you consume hot water, right, you pay, and that is a natural incentive for people not to consume so much hot water or energy or whatever else you're doing, turning out the lights. You got the people that like to freeze themselves out in the winter to lower the heat bills. But in technology, the model's shifted, and I think it's created a little bit of a challenge in people not understanding or having to pay for the implications of their habits or actions on society.
But it's unlimited entertainment. And then you may, to your point, you may not recognize it because it's just like, well, I'm not paying for this. I've signed up for the account. Now, on the LLM side, which is the different models, there's a pay to play, and sometimes it's $20 a month for chat and Claude for the entry level. But I blew through the $20 plan. Like Claude, I've noticed stops me more and says you're out of tokens. Hit continue to go on, and I had to upgrade to the $100 a month plan.
Hey, they're going to get us eventually.
Well, they're going to have to.
Yeah, I
right?
mean, I think I told you I have a buddy who's like he's got a lot of agentic stuff going on. He's spending like $30 a day.
I was listening to a podcast with the developer of Claude Code. He's like the guy that built it, and they were talking about, he's like, yeah, Claude Code writes 100% of our code now. But I review it and it's pretty fascinating, and goes, one of the ways we're recruiting people is we're telling them we're going to give them unlimited spend. And he goes, we have people that run $100,000 a month, like in tokens. And like, what do we pay for our tokens at IMG? Like
next to nothing.
We have the whole company using it. It was like $134 or something.
No, it was like $34.
So you can imagine, to your point, $100,000, and I mean, you could, if you're like, hey, write this, and let it run for 3 days. I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but the cost of AI, and I also heard the data centers that these GPUs and stuff burn out every 3 to 5 years. So they build the massive data center, but the replacement of the parts and the ongoing, it's going to get expensive. And in instances where you might be saving from gaining some efficiency, you may, in turn, that may end up getting at some point. Maybe I should phrase it as a question. Do you feel at some point the cost of this is going to equal the cost of maybe the efficiency that you gained, whether it's replacing an employee or?
Absolutely. I mean, it's capitalism. Did you get the emails this week that YouTube Premium and Netflix are raising prices?
Again?
Although strangely, Google One is dropping prices on their storage, which I thought was nuts. But I absolutely think so. Eventually, it'll be $20 an hour or $10 an hour in token cost to create an agentic platform that handles for 100%, just a little bit less than it would cost to have a human. I think so. Over time, it's going to be
just getting you in, and
yeah.
I try to buy Anthropic stock. It's not publicly traded. Just so
it'll be interesting to see if companies start to pay. Like I got an email the other day that Shopify, my product that's on Shopify, is now able to be found and purchased through ChatGPT. And so it'll be interesting to see if the companies do start to foot some of the bill, and it allows to keep it very, very low for the consumer. And that's essentially what happens on Meta and Facebook and Instagram and those platforms.
Well, that's a great point. Do you guys go on there and say, hey, I'm looking for XYZ, and then it runs, and I'm looking for a platform. It does give suggestions. Like
Perplexity in particular is really, really good at that. Perplexity is kind of built for reviews. I'm a reviews junkie, and to TJ's point earlier about data, we are drowning in data and information. And that's actually one of the things that I think why AI for me in particular is so compelling, because it helps us sift through that data. It takes the mountains and mountains of, I don't care if it's a 30-page document or a 400-page book or 500 reviews of which half are fake and you have no idea how to discern. It can do a lot of that discernment and boil it down to what actually matters. And so I do appreciate that. I mean, it's really hard to, when you get into the cost benefit analysis, like many of these things, it just gets infinitely complex. I heard the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie
Dimon.
Jamie Dimon, say he thinks it's going to be a 3.5-day work week here pretty soon, thanks to AI. And I think there's a lot of different potential benefits, whether it's a shorter work week, whether it's a universal basic income, whether it's just improved ability to digest the information, make more efficient decisions, in our day-to-day lives. The benefits are certainly great, but the costs are adding up.
One of the things that I think it would be interesting to pivot into a little bit is how responsible these leaders in the space are being with, again, I said it earlier, right? And I'd love for you to talk about it because I think it's probably fresher in your head, the way we're approaching AI. It's been somewhat of the Wild West, right? There's been tension over the last half decade with, between there was the Sam Altman, Elon kind of thing where Sam was kind of more like, let's just go pedal to the metal. And Elon's, used to be more like that. We're like, let's just go forward, but it maybe is a little bit more reserved, right? As you see it now, but it's really intriguing, like the LLM thing and the attempt to have, these large language models that know everything versus solving particular problems, which is a more agentic approach. It seems extraordinarily irresponsible. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you've learned as it relates to that versus a different approach potentially?
Yeah, I was going to ask you guys, that was one of the questions that I had is like AI, most people are saying there's this euphoric future and possibility of everything it raises the bar for humanity in general. This is the likely outcome. And then there's this 25% that's like doomsday. And everyone that's building their own LLM is like, it'll be this blissful thing if you just support mine, right? Why does every billionaire tech entrepreneur have their own system, right? So there's this like, this could be really bad, but if you if you go with the one that I built, so you think of this as in like personalities. If all three of us had billions of dollars and wanted to build our own LLM, we're going to come at it slightly different, right? We're going to have Elon's approaching this different than OpenAI, the way Altman was doing it, the way that Anthropic seems to be more mission driven. Like and so you have all these personalities building these large language models that take like, Elon's kind of a funny, edgy dude. So like Grok is funny and edgy and can do some things that others can't. So they each have this personality. And to me, that's going to be fascinating. I don't know how many we're going to end up with. Right now, what is there? Probably 4 or 5.
Let's call it
Gemini, Facebook, Meta.
Meta's is kind of, I feel like on the outside looking in a little bit, but Gemini for sure, Claude for sure, OpenAI, so ChatGPT, Grok, Perplexity, and then like Blue Sky. If you look, Asia's got, you were just there, but like, they're not Blue Sky or Blue, whatever it is. There's the one that came online really quickly, like 18 months ago and learned really whatever. But there's 5 or 6, but let's call it those 5 major ones in the US right now. But you make a great point. Every LLM or every big AI company is trying to sell you on their approach.
And which one's right and which one's going to be the right play. And if we had billions of dollars, we would convince ourselves that we needed to have an LLM that was approaching it this way. We would take this, more moralistic approach, I'm sure. But the other thing that ties into this, I don't know if you had anything to add on that.
I think with the 5, I think what you're going to find out is we're going to end up with specializations, just like we have in many other industries. You're going to have, I toggle between them. For image generation, I go to Nano Banana Pro, which is Gemini's. It's fantastic. For any sort of brainstorming, conceptual, just like things, I go to ChatGPT, and I still think it's absolutely the best when it comes to business type things and coding and or efficiency type
Building
place.
documents.
Documents stuff. It's Claude, and I think it's not. I don't think any of these guys are right or wrong, and I don't know that any of them is building the evil or the great morally moral North Star, but I think we're going to end up with different specializations across the models.
Can we talk a little bit about the dark side of AI for a second? So,
What dark side?
Yeah.
So I was listening to a podcast, and this hasn't hit home for us. Let's just be clear. I'm in a town of 25,000. We have probably 3 software developers that maybe even live in this county, right? But software developers there's been tons that have been displaced. Like that's a legit, people are losing their jobs. So I was listening to this podcast that was talking about this and it was the Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett, and they were talking about the people that are being displaced. One of the jobs that's becoming available is this data AI trainer kind of role, and they're all project based. And these people who are now unemployed are basically having to fight for these projects to be able to train the AI model, and they're extracting the data at like pennies on the dollar, right? Like, hey, get on here for $15 an hour, tell me everything and how I would respond to this. Like chat didn't know how to respond to something before someone got in there and taught it how to respond to something. So there's this ongoing need into the future that is going to continually need as society progresses, and people are going to have to take what they've learned and crafted over years and years and years. As it replaces them, they're going to be stuck in this role of kind of feeding the engine at pennies on the dollar. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I listened to some of the same thing, and it's pretty nuts. It's like gig economy stuff for these people. And I remember there was like a visceral response to one of the stories. The lady had a kid, and she was a developer, and now she's like sitting there, and it's exactly like gig economy, right? If you're delivering DoorDash, you're sitting there waiting for the next one, right? If you're driving Uber, you're waiting for the ride to come through, and in a lot of instances, that supports a lifestyle where you don't have a lot of responsibility, where you can sit and wait for something to come in. And so she was like, yeah, I've got my baby or my kids, they're young kids, and I'm sitting there at the dinner table with my laptop open, waiting for this gig to come through so I can train this model. And then once the gig comes through, I'm ripping through this as fast as I can to get as much data processed as I can. And I'm screaming at my kids because they're bothering me while I'm trying to do this, but I don't want to lose out on this potential opportunity to make money. And so to me, there's definitely a lot of potential dark side to this, but that was one that was a real eye opener that you don't even think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the disruption's real from a job loss perspective. We've seen several companies cut 5 digits jobs, tens of thousands, not like a few hundred. And I think it's going to continue. And I think society is extremely resilient, and I don't want to mute the disruption and the devastation that a lot of families are going to go through, because a lot of those software developers were breadwinners in their families, because these are easily 6-figure jobs, a lot of times multiple 6-figure jobs, and all of a sudden the rug kind of gets pulled out from under you. I mean, that's the challenge there. So I think on a macro level, there is massive, massive disruption that's going to happen. I do think society is resilient, and we'll find... right now there's some of that, right, that's happening. But I think those that can retool themselves and reskill themselves, and those that can lean into some of the skills and capabilities that AI is really bad at, will find new ways to leverage that technology and be more inventive. It's probably going to take some time, more time than maybe it took when some of the automation in the manufacturing system displaced some jobs. I don't know that was that cut as deep as this is going to cut. I think this is going to cut deeper, and it's going to take longer. But we were talking the other day in insurance, right? So one of the things that AI is really, really good at is looking at images and inventorying things that are in these images, right? So And one of the issues with insurance is if you have a house fire, God forbid, like it's a lot of question around what was in there, what wasn't, what needs replaced. We could potentially be using staff capacity that we create with efficiency to go into people's homes, take these 360-degree view pictures of all the rooms in their house, and immediately within 15 minutes or 20 minutes have a complete inventory of everything that they have in their house that really simplify the claim process if there were to be a claim. And so I think our ability to, as a society, to invent those new things, and I think we're still 2 decades off from robots going out and doing household chores at scale. I realize there are robots now that are prototyping doing dishes and cleaning houses and things like that. But I think, those sorts of things where the human ingenuity, the human physical activity, the emotional side, the connective side, I think there's still a lot of things that we do much, much, much better than AI. And I think we're going to see those economies grow.
Do you feel like regulation around the people that are feeding these systems, like there should be some balance of like they're getting paid for the contributions they're making there should be some, I don't know if it's unionized that I'm thinking of, but not to be taken advantage of in a situation where, they're somewhat desperate, right? And so they're feeding the model. And how much, and I know this is another contention point, is there's like things are being, for lack of a better term, pirated. Like people's intellectual protocol are being just kind of dumped in there. It's kind of like Napster back in the day, right? Like you can put anything in there and it could be anybody's and it could be used. So like you've got the modern day Napster that's basically stealing IPs from people, and that's not really regulated. How do you guys feel like this should be regulated more or less, or not at all?
I mean, I think with the regulations, it depends on how far upstream you want to solve the problem. So I think with regulations, you're taking a situation where a lot of people have lost their jobs. Everybody's trying to clamor for a dollar, and the natural free system without regulation can capitalize on that. And honestly, it's the same thing that companies are capitalizing on with employees overseas, right? Employees overseas are capitalizing on people's willingness to work for less because the alternatives are not there for high-paying jobs. So I think it gets to be a slippery slope. What I'd like to see is us go further upstream to prevent the issue. I think as these companies are doing very, very well, and they're finding efficiencies that are creating millions, if not billions of dollars of efficiencies, depending on your size as a company, I think severance needs to be a much more generous, thoughtful thing. I think, a lot of these companies depend on how you make, people are getting maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months if they're lucky to find their footing and replace hundreds of thousands of dollars of income. I would love to see things be phased out more. If it's like, if you're going to let people go, and I don't know exactly how this gets implemented, because certainly there's for cause and not for cause and that sort of thing, but as you're creating efficiencies, can you run someone down 75% of their salary, 50% of their salary, 25% of their salary over a year's time, or give them 6 to 9 months? I think that's going to be really, really important, is more generously walking people off the off-ramp, or taking people down the off-ramp so they have an opportunity to find their footing. To me, that's going to minimize, I shouldn't say minimize, it's going to help aid the chaos of people willing to do whatever for whatever.
Yeah, I think one of the other issues that is, I think, an analogy that was used in that podcast you referred to is the rocket versus the bicycle. And it kind of goes back to, like early mid-century, where we were seeing the government break up a lot of monopolies, right? Whether it's Standard Oil or Ma Bell, right? With the whole AT&T thing. And it's crazy because what we've gotten ourselves to right now is we've got 5 companies there's only 5 companies in the world that can afford to build what they're building. These giant, and the analogy was they're building these rockets, right? That are these I can do it all platforms. And they each have, like you said, they each have their own kind of little ideology alongside it. And they each have their story, like, oh yeah, if you don't get in bed with us, like when certain models have come online, and they claim that they are the ones that are more concerned with AI safety. They're like, get in bed with us, because if you don't, AI is going to kill everybody. And so like they're jumping on board. Oh, I want to do this with whoever because they're the ones that are worried about this potential existential threat. It would be really interesting to see if something could be done to make this technology more accessible, meaning like you could build it with very specific goals in mind. Because like, if you were a group of, let's just say, insurance agencies, and you wanted to work on a platform that handled, and I know you guys are looking at different agents and building out things that handle specific tasks, but if there was an opportunity for other companies to build things out as opposed to, and then as you're getting more specific, you're not requiring the resources that building these all-knowing God beings are creating. So, I'd love to see it pivot that way and see companies, many more smaller AI companies focusing on very specific things. And again, you see a little bit of it, but everybody that's getting the shine are these monsters that are trying to build, consciousness, if you will. And I just don't know, like, for me, what's the purpose of that, of getting to that, right? Of getting to something that can solve the Turing test. Like, why? Why are we obsessed with this versus solving these specific problems that could optimize, scenarios for humanity? Like, I feel like anything over and above that's just a complete waste.
I think people are finding those use cases in their own lives, and that's why the popularity has grown. To your point, solving the Turing test or whatever that is that you referenced, I don't think there's really any purpose there, but people are finding ways to create efficiencies within their business. They're finding ways to create efficiencies in their personal lives, and that's why I think the demand continues to skyrocket, because people are finding these own. I mean, yeah, in a perfect world, I think a lot of this energy gets concentrated into more holistic efforts that benefit humanity and society, as opposed to they're growing and developing at the expense of humanity and society in a sense. But it's just really hard to measure out that ROI. I think the other thing I was going to add that I think is a little bit different here, I don't know that I see a lot of the demonizing between, I've seen a little bit of it, but less as of late, demonizing across AI companies in the US. I don't see Google kind of taking shots at OpenAI or OpenAI taking shots at Anthropic.
No.
But what I do see is I think there's a collective race between like the US and China, for example, that I think is a little more real. And that's where I think you get hesitations on regulations, because regulations do one thing very, very well, and that's slow things down. And so I think there's a lot of hesitation from a US perspective. They're letting these companies run fast and hard and on the backs of, right? I mean, if you look at any revolutionary period, transformative period, a lot of times it's on the backs of people and societies that are working probably harder than what they're being compensated for. I mean, you look at America and like the railroads and when the infrastructure was built, and then you look at a lot of these other third world countries or developing countries, they're working for very, very limited compensation, and that is how these companies or these countries, are able to kind of catch up. Is because of that. So I think that's why we're seeing a lack of regulation right now, is because the U.S. wants to win this race, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
But do you think they're gaslighting us? What race? Like what? I mean, yes, we can all theorize. Like if China gets to whatever arbitrary point first, then they're going to have superior military technology and they're going to kill all of us. Or if we don't get to this certain point before so-and-so, AI is, the paperclip problem, right? AI is going to kill everybody. We need more of your money. We need more of your resources. Even if, like you said, if it's a collective, because it makes sense for all five of those companies, because the barrier to entry is astronomical to come out and say, hey, we got to win this. If we don't, we're all going to die. what are they gaslighting us? I'd be interested is it real? Like it's,
I think it's dramatized. I think for sure it's dramatized. I think that's just natural. The human brain forms a hypothesis that, and we like to think of the worst. So I think it absolutely is dramatized that if China gets there first, here are the implications. And the reality is, we don't know, right? We don't know how far ahead does someone need to be to where it starts to be exponentially beneficial. If it gets this far ahead and then it can take that advantage and compound it, you don't know. One of those things where it's like maybe there's a 10% chance that someone's going to get out ahead of it with the wrong motives or values, but the reality is 90%. It's like, okay, their AI may be a little bit better. I just got back from there, and what I will tell you is their AMAP system is way better than Google Maps. It's fantastic, but there's obviously China's. Their AMAP, their navigation system is so much better than Google Maps. It's honestly a travesty, but there's no implications to that, right? There's no implications to a more sophisticated mapping system. And so if they happen to have their own AI models that are a little more sophisticated, what does that actually mean? I don't know. It's likely dramatized, to answer your question.
Go back to you're like the most powerful AI to do what, right? I think one of the positives, I kind of want to shift a little bit into the positives now, because I think there are some obviously concerns, but if you're an entrepreneur, AI is probably the most powerful thing that's ever been introduced from a lot of different standpoints. You can build a company quicker, more thorough, faster than you've ever been able to build before. And you can solve complex problems with less resources. Like, when YouTube first came out, if you want to be a YouTuber, you want to do clips and reels, you had an entire team. Right? You probably had video editors. You're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to pull it off. You don't need any of that now. You need one setup. You get your Rodecaster video switcher. It's very simplistic to do. An entrepreneur, I was like, you think about who uses the tool. Well, it's someone who's really trying to solve a lot of different problems, and to gather the information that you can gather as an entrepreneur trying to solve problems, it's unbelievable. And I think that's why I'm specifically so excited about it, because it literally makes what I want to do. I have these visions of things that I'm not capable of carrying out. Like man, it wouldn't be cool if we could do this. And then it was like, yeah, this would be cool. Would you like me to build it for you? I'm like, yeah, build it for me. And then I can test it and be like, well, let's switch this. And they're like, okay, would you like me to build the website? Yeah, build the website. You could, as a race director, you could show up and it'll build out a whole website for your race, and it could set up a data. It could do all this stuff. And it's like, for people that are trying to solve problems efficiently, I think it's going to allow a lot more small businesses to jump up and play in larger fields against some of the bigger players, because the red tape isn't as thick to get there anymore.
I think it ultimately does the exact opposite.
Please tell me more.
And I think that it's like the Instagram ad problem, social media ad problem. You're experiencing this firsthand, where when people started leveraging social media for business use cases, especially early on, it was so cool, right? You could, we'll start with Facebook and Instagram, but you could get content out there to the masses, and the Instagram is a better example, right? You could post on your company account, whatever small business you had, stuff that was relevant to your products or your brand or your services, and you could get it out there to your followers. Today, most companies that I've dealt with are starting to trend back towards in-person activations. Great example. I won't name names because I don't want to divulge someone's business, but there's a company I work with, and they sell branded products, and 70% of what they do is done online. It's done through Amazon. And so there's the majority of the branded products that they sell. So they have 6 or 7 brand partners are sold via Amazon. Their brand partners care about one thing only, and that is the in-store retail experience and the engagement that they have with the community. It's all they care about. And I think what potentially ends up happening because we're seeing, because those companies are seeing like, there are so many people paying on social media for ads. It is so cluttered. It is so overwhelming. I can't build fans of my brand anymore. It's impossible. So I have to do in-person activations and build this foundation at the community level. And I think that's ultimately what happens is we're going to have a bunch of entrepreneurs out here that are building soulless, companies with no human interaction. And then what it ends up becoming, if it does stay affordable for the time being, is everybody's doing exactly what you're doing. Hey, I think this would be really cool for me. Claude, build me this. Perfect example. 3 weeks ago, I, as you guys know, I do a lot of virtual running on the treadmill, and I like to do workouts. And so for me to do workouts using the program, the virtual running program, I have to use this website that builds the workouts for me. I upload them to the program and I can do them. Well, this workout building website is kind of archaic. It's been around for 5 to 6 years. So I'm like, you know what, Claude, I want to build my own. Done. 3 hours. And I think you'll see now. I love the vision of, man, I could like optimize this, and then I could like do this and get all these people to use my platform, ZwiftRunner.io, if anybody's whatever. I get all these people to use my platform to build their workouts, to do their virtual runs. But I think the missing piece there is, if I were ever to want to do that, I have to spend so much time engaging with people on the platform, letting them know about the thing, selling people on why virtual running is cool. And so I'd have to build that foundationally through connection. Now, where I do for it to be successful, now where I do think it does provide value is when you're in a situation where you have a foundation built already. And then you're optimizing on top of that and maybe spreading out and attacking a couple of different verticals that way. But I think starting things from scratch, it becomes this situation where, but at the end of the day, where it heaps more value on human connection. And then we start to find those areas you were talking about where, okay, you got to retool and you have to realize that it's about this now. Because building a website, anybody can do it in 10 minutes and it'll be coded perfectly and it'll execute exactly like you want.
This reminds me of Progressive. I've told this story several times after I learned about it, which is Progressive. The reason that they became who they were is because they figured out how to ask the right question. They asked the right question about one-time drunk driving offenders. They were looking at data and analytics and figuring out how they could find a niche. And what they found is with one-time drunk driving offenders, they could charge basically whatever they wanted because no one other insurance company would write them. And in 8 out of 10 cases, they would never have another one because it was kind of a scare. They on a way home from a wedding or some other kind of event, they had one situation and they asked the right question and it exploded. And I think this is going to be interesting. I think we're going to find as AI continues to be more sophisticated, it is going to favor the creatives. It is going to favor the innovators. It's going to favor the people that know how to ask the right questions of it and use it to create an experience for people that probably has to do in part with an in-person scenario. And so how can you take your races that are naturally in person and use AI in a way to curate that experience to be as enjoyable and fruitful as possible based on whatever mission you're trying to accomplish? And I think that is where people are, it's going to be rocket fuel for the right companies, because I do think there's a lot of people out there aimlessly doing random things that are not going to have the staying power because there's no emotional connection.
I think a great example, utilizing the kind of guardrails you gave there is, we have live tracking at Prairie. And so utilizing AI to enhance that dashboard and to make it available publicly so more people can consume that information, people can have a better idea at the race of what's unfolding, how many people are left, versus somebody who goes out and they're like, hey, Nano Banana, I want you to make me a logo for my race. Thanks. Okay, ChatGPT, can you create a social post that I can put on Instagram and I can put on Facebook so people are aware of my races? Okay, Run sign up. You've got a really robust platform. I'll use you for timing and you for, so least effort possible. I set up a race then I think, we start to see this situation where there's pullback and it's like, there's no soul, somebody set up a race and they did all these things, but unless you're doing the footwork on the ground, or you've already built a community that you can market that kind of stuff to. But I think we've talked about this in so many episodes before. We're also starting to recognize when something is hollow. When it's a logo that AI designed, or when it's a video that it's just, we have to naturally. So
I think what you're saying is like, it just makes it so crowded when everyone's doing it. It's not special anymore. And one of the things on that podcast that I listened to that they talked about was like, before the printing press, the amount of people that could read was like, I don't know, 3% or 4%. Printing press gets invented, and now all of a sudden, the newspapers and everyone has access to actually read stuff, and now everyone learns to read, and that's a good thing. And you just wonder if that's going to be the way with software development. When like building an app or building software is like, it's a very expensive, tedious thing. And if you still want to build it good, it's like one thing to build it, another thing to maintain it, another thing to support it, and so forth and so on. But when software development becomes normal, and they think in 2 to 3 years, all you really need is a business case. You won't now you still need the guy. Like you still need maybe an engineer to I tried to set up Claude Code, and you got to put a terminal. I still can't even figure out how to get to, so there's still some complexity, but at some point it'll just be you got a business case and you're build me an app, run sign up that does this for just my races, and it'll do it. That it's going to take away once everyone can build software. Now all of a sudden software doesn't become a differentiator per se. It just clutters the market.
Yeah. What happens? That's such an interesting point. What happens when every race,
has its own app.
Yeah. And how frustrating is it when you want to track somebody on a race, and then you go back and you look at your phone at the end of the year and you have 7 race apps because you track somebody in the Mini and you track somebody in Monumental in Chicago. And it's
and then you create an app to
aggregate
the 7 apps. Hey, I want to get this data from these 7 feeds and pull them in.
And that's where I think some of this is going to shift. I think people will discern what the gap is, right? And what the frustration points are, and then they'll pull things together to solve it. And that will be, and that's where I think we're going to go into an era where the creatives are going to dominate for the better part of the next few decades. I mean, if we look at the last few decades, the technical has dominated. Creatives, it's whether it is acting or an artist or those sorts of things, it's feast or famine. You've got a very small percentage of people that hit it absolutely huge, and you have a large percentage of people who are really struggling. Starving artists. I mean, that's even in photo and video production. Video production's been a little more consistent, but I think the creatives have been out there struggling for decades, while the coders and the technical people and the project managers and those who had the STEM skills have been reaping all of the benefits. And I think we're going to see a shift there. And I know we've talked about this in prior podcasts, but it needs to start infiltrating its way into the school systems really, really quickly. That system is designed to very much crush creativity and crush most of the artists that get through school in spite of it, as opposed to, and so I think we're going to see an interesting shift, and a different type of personality is going to be maybe more set up for success.
I think it's probably a good tie bow.
Well, it's interesting. We went from our data centers good or bad and what they're supplying, but we spent a lot of the time on AI in general and a lot of the use cases, which it's just so relevant right now. If you're not using it, you should try it, whether personally or professionally. There's so many things that could help you become more efficient. And what I'm finding is the more efficient I can become, the more time I can spend with my family. And so there are things that I would definitely look into. So hope you guys gain some value, and we look forward to seeing you next time.